Is there anything particularly that's blown your mind as a neuroscientist as you traverse these psychic realms?
In the same way that I wouldn't say that religion should explain science, I don't think science should try and explain religion or mysticism either. But there is an overlap.
How do you bridge that gap?
I wish upon all the materialists like a visit from an alien at the foot of your bed. Like that's the only thing I can wish so that we can actually move this conversation forward.
What do you see is coming for culture as far as our perception of things?
You can think I'm as crazy as you'd like. There will be, I believe, a generally accepted understanding that
Mayim Bialik, thank you so much for making time to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Mayim, you are a PhD neuroscientist and you grew up extremely famous, which is very strange. Is the human mind set or available to extreme fame? You grew up, you were Blossom. I watched you growing up when I was very young. What does that do to a young girl or young person to grow up with extreme fame like that? Is it reasonable? Is it okay? Is it a trauma? Is it positive? Is it negative? What is that?
I think it's a combination of all of the things, such as life, I was actually just speaking with my younger son, who's 18, about how it's very easy when things are black and white. Then we kind of know I fall on this side and you fall on that side. But I think the same is true of experiences. Like, I'd love to be able to say, like, it was amazing and it was perfect and I loved it. Or I could also, alternatively say it was horrible and it was traumatic and there's nothing good about it. And the fact is, it's somewhere in between. There's a lot of complexity to that experience. We are not wired, I think, to receive that kind of social information, that kind of validation. Also that kind of, being told you're perfect and amazing and great when it pleases someone. But if you have a normal set of human emotions, that's not acceptable. Like, those are not normal things, right? It's not normal for a child to learn to subjugate their needs to please adults, right? It's not normal to work an 8-hour day at 15 years old and to know that if you get sick, 300 people can't work, right? Like, those are not normal things. But there was also a lot of life outside of the set, where I worked, and those, 10 hours, 12 hours a day that I spent there, that was the rest of my life, which also had a lot of things that were not normal or acceptable, and also a lot of things that were amazing. But yeah, when people point to what happens to child actors and the drugs and the fame, it's because it's not normal for young people to be in those situations, and to have those demands put on them, for sure.
And then you shifted to studying to get your PhD in neuroscience. Mm-hmm. And now you go into topics much similar to this podcast, remote viewing and telepathy and out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences and alien abductions and things of the sort. How do you reconcile Western neuroscientific speak and that realm or that instrument or tool to perceive things with the realm of the more esoteric?
Sure.
How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think you've spoken to some of the greatest guests on your podcast, who are doing that. People like Thomas Campbell and people like Dr. Bruce Lipton, these are sort of the people who are able to speak both languages, and not as a way to manipulate people or get them to believe something that isn't true. But we've tried to divide, right, the mind and body. In the most kind of simplistic sense, we've tried to divide them, and science does many incredible things. And, if you have a bullet lodged in your body, chances are it's going to need to be excised using the wisdom and the knowledge, right, of Western medicine. That's not untrue. But is that the entire way that you will heal, let's say, from a bullet in your body? Absolutely not, right? Because we know there's so many other things that contribute to this sort of integration of really being human. That's really what we're talking about. So if you ask me, does science solve everything about being human? Of course not. Does it solve a lot of things? Yeah, but there's this entire other part of us that I find, even in the most scientific realms, it's pretty difficult, to dissect it out completely. And I've spoken to people who are, staunch materialists. It seems very cold and loveless to me. They don't seem like they're really living their best joyous life. I really would like that for them. I wish upon all the materialists like a visit from an alien at the foot of your bed. Like that's the only thing I can wish so that we can actually move this conversation forward. But the truth is, there's a tremendous amount that I needed to understand about the physiology of the brain and nervous system. There's a tremendous amount about what we know about mental health and how it functions, right? And how the brain can facilitate different mood states. There's incredible research that allows us to understand psychosis, to understand dissociation, to understand, all of the disorders that many of us dip a toe into when we start thinking about the esoteric. So, both are needed, but for sure, I don't think, in the same way that I wouldn't say that religion should explain science, I don't think science should try and explain religion or mysticism either. But there is an overlap, and there's these beautiful Venn diagrams where we can start to see, oh, this actually does get spoken for. Quantum physics is freaking trippy, even if you're sober, as the day is long, because it's phenomenal to contemplate, right? The other realms of the things that we can't see or understand. And as you know, you can touch those things in a lot of ways, but science also can touch them.
Is there anything particularly that's blown your mind as a neuroscientist as you traverse these psychic realms? Is there anything that at one point you thought was absolute phooey, impossible, that now you are a believer in?
I don't mean to answer like such a scientist, it's a great question. I don't know if there's kind of absolutes, there's like bits and pieces that I wouldn't have necessarily put together. I mean, for me, I'm so grateful, as I'm sure you are as well, to get to learn from all these incredible people. Much as I have training, I'm trained in a very specific, aspect of my field, and to speak to the kinds of people you and I get to learn from, it's kind of tremendous. Like I can't hold all of the things in my brain that Thomas Campbell does, but he can draw on that. And, actually, I think Thomas Campbell's experience when, he tried transcendental meditation and it worked the very first time. And he said after that, he was, walking around and he saw what looked like strings of like sticky substance between objects. And what he was seeing was like energy. And it literally was as if he had turned that tuning knob, right? That has really changed the way I see what it really is to perceive, right? And that notion that everybody's got their tuning dial and some people have a wider frequency that they can access, right? That makes sense. And we know that that's true in every other realm of our understanding of our physical being. I have a kid who was a lot more aware of what his socks felt like than I was. And that's just one example. Like, what do you mean your socks are bothering you? Like, what do you mean, right? I had no idea. And I might have assumed that's nuts. Like, what's going on, right? His dial is tuned to that. And if we extrapolate that out, that's how I actually now understand people who seem to be somewhere else. I no longer think like, that's crazy, right? I think like, wow, that person has a dial that is receiving and sending out information on levels of the frequency spectrum that I do not understand.
Yeah, I mentioned before, I was at the Monroe Institute last week and went through the whole out-of-body experience, remote viewing, gateway process. And one of the things that the teacher there mentioned that I just stood out as like a quotable thing was, with science, we are observing the measurable. And as once something becomes measurable, it's scientific and it's valid. And there's a lot happening that we just don't have the instrumentation to measure yet. Therefore, it doesn't exist.
Correct.
But the moment there's an instrument to measure it, suddenly it exists.
And we will be self-righteously waving our fingers at all those people. I mean, my children are first in line. Like, your mother's not crazy.
What do you see is coming for culture as far as our perception of things?
So I literally said a very similar thing to what you just said. I literally said this to my kid the other day. I still have one at home. You know, he's a senior in high school this coming year. And I said to him, you can think I'm as crazy as you'd like. I'm just letting you know that within your lifetime, and it may be after I'm gone, there will be, I believe, a generally accepted understanding that there are things that we cannot measure or perceive that are perceivable and will be able to be measured. I believe that that will be more accepted as common knowledge. In the same way that when I was a kid, the thought that there might be like aliens was like, what? That's the stuff of science fiction. And when I talk to my kids who are, 18 and 21, they're like, well, of course there's life on other planets. Like, why are we even talking about this? Like, that's enormous just in the last 30 years, right?
What is, from your perception, I'm curious your perception. I believe multiple cultures oftentimes have different ways of describing the exact same thing. So if you were to see a shaman about your depression or your anxiety or your issues, your OCD, which I know that you have a lot of experience with, they might say, there's an entity that's attached to you, and this is what's happening. Or if you'd see a Western neuroscience person, they might say, oh, you need, you see a psychiatrist, say, oh, these medications, see a psychologist, say, oh, there's trauma. You've stored impressions of trauma repressed in your body. And once you release those blockages, you will become more free and you won't have these issues anymore. What are your thoughts on the more esoteric, shamanistic lenses on things like OCD or anxiety or depression being like an energetic thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think the larger question is like, what is energy, right? What are we talking about when we talk about energy? And, I would even paint with a broader brush than you. It's all the same thing. Like, we're literally all experiencing the same thing. I come from a tradition of oneness. So like, everything's one. It's all the same. We have different ways that we use language to describe that. And we have different cultural frameworks for that. And, my hunch is that the cultures and communities that have consistently been around for longer, away from the industrial capitalist hierarchical patriarchy, probably have a pretty good idea about what's going on in the human experience. And unfortunately, that is not the way many of us were raised to even see traditional cultures or indigenous communities. So I tend to favor, this notion that you cannot necessarily transpose, right, another culture's framework onto yours without there being some static and miscommunication or disconnection or need for translation, right? And I think that's one of the things, and I live in Los Angeles, where like, you can't swing a dead cat, without finding someone who did an ayahuasca journey, in Ojai last weekend. Like, it's very, very, it's very much in our water here. And I have a tremendous amount of respect, for people who go on those journeys and for people who also engage with shamans and, have those kind of experiences. But I also think they shouldn't be taken lightly. I think they're very, very serious and meaningful approaches. But it does involve a real shift, a real shift in how we think about things. It's kind of like when you learn another language, right? You're not just learning the language, you're learning the culture of how that language sees the world, right? And I feel the same way about delving into the ways that other cultures describe, as you said, mental health conditions, entities, what ails us, right? It's all kind of the same thing, right?
This is a broad question, which you could take a lot of different ways. From your perspective, what comes to mind when I ask what is at the core of dis-ease for the modern person?
I'm kind of a Johann Hari person on this. I think disconnection, a lack of integration with ourselves, with others, and with God, or with a higher power. There's so many ways around that. It's a beautiful question. I think being a conscious human being is astounding, and I think it should floor us. I think we should wake up in astonishment. And I think that every interaction is an opportunity to realize that we have a conscious experience, right? And every night when we go to bed, like think about what happens. Like you sort of die every night, right? You go night night and you're kind of unplugged in this unbelievable state, right? That also can be accessed in waking hours through deep meditation and, being in touch with different wavelengths, right? That your brain can produce. All that's amazing. And I think if people were more in touch with that and more integrated with that, yeah, I'd like to believe in this messianic concept of maybe we wouldn't have to keep killing each other. And maybe there wouldn't be the kind of hatred that we are experiencing as a human race. Maybe we'd be kinder to the planet. Like I'm one of these like very big picture, like I don't think that's far off, right? If 10% of the people change, it starts rippling out. Like this is it. This is not a dress rehearsal,
This podcast is brought to you by Pendulum. Everyone's talking about GLP-1s right now, but what I find very interesting is supporting your body's own natural GLP-1 response without a prescription. That's what led me to Pendulum Metabolic Daily. It is a science-backed probiotic built around Akkermansia, a gut bacterium that's been studied by PhD researchers from Harvard, Berkeley, and Stanford. It's also the #1 GI doctor recommended Akkermansia probiotic. It's a 5-strain probiotic designed to support your body's natural GLP-1 response, helping you feel fuller longer, experience fewer cravings, and stay on track with your health goals. You just take 1 capsule a day with food. Some people notice fewer cravings and steadier energy in as little as a week, though everyone's experience is different. I like that it's supporting the foundation instead of chasing quick fixes. It's also supporting healthy blood sugar and metabolic health, making those afternoon energy dips a little less tempting. Right now, podcast listeners can get an exclusive 20% off their first order at pendulum.com/align. That's pendulum.com/align for an extra 20% off your first order. Again, that's pendulum.com/align. Get 20% off today. Yeah, I talked to the channel Paul Selig a couple days ago, who he's great. If you haven't talked to him, I think you would appreciate it. He's great. He's a legit channel. There's a lot of bullshit channels in my opinion, which is actually my projection, but I think there's quite a bit of people that identify as channel that they're like, oh crap, I need to like throw on the persona of channel right now because I need to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And Paul's like a very reluctant channel. He's like, yeah, I mean, I've 13 books have come through me as a vehicle, and it's fairly inconvenient, because I have to be a vehicle to be able to be a passage for all this. I don't even know what the book is about.
That's amazing.
And so you could ask him kind of anything, and if it's something that Paul can answer, Paul will answer it, and if it's something that he calls them the guides would be able to better field, they'll kind of just come in, and he'll kind of like boom, and he'll disappear, and the guides will speak. I love Paul. But that one of the things that he mentioned around like war, as long as war exists as a concept, it will continue to perpetuate. And ultimately war is this divide between mine and yours and ownership of property and greed. And what he said is at some point right now, culture is amidst this great reckoning, and anything that's manifested as a product of fear, which might be practically everything in like the society that we exist within, that will begin to disassemble. And the things that you consider to be normal will begin to kind of evaporate, and something new will arise, because as long as there was fear integrated into the cement that built the building blocks of the structures, all of those structures will need to fall.
Yeah.
And he described a moment where the concept of war is not a thing anymore. And when we come to a place, it's like, it's not even as a concept. It's not a part of our structure. And then that will be a moment where it's like, okay, now this is like some great new beginning of sorts. My question, I had a question. The question originally was, what, from your perception, is the cure to disease in modern culture? If there was a cure. I know it's too broad because everything's nuanced. And
it's very hard. It's very hard. The reason it's hard for me to answer is because, the answer that I have, I think, encompasses a lot of other components, which some people might single out. I think a connection to something bigger than yourself. That's it. God, for me, it's God. There's dozens and dozens of names in my tradition for God. We don't have just one name. But Yeah, the thing that existed before there was anything, like to have a reverence for that, to be in awe, that I didn't make this and I'm actually not in charge, is an incredibly liberating concept in the extension of that, right? It impacts your physical well-being, it impacts your mental well-being, and it grows the spiritual part of you that is a human being and not a human doing, right? In Western culture, we're kind of raised to be human doings. Here are the things I do this. What do you do? What does he do for a living, right? But we're actually human beings. Like, just being is kind of having that relationship with a power greater than ourselves. And that encompasses then like nature, anything that brings that awe, anything that brings that moment, right? That's that divinity.
How does what are the action steps for a person to reconnect to God?
There's, as many choices as there are people. I think one of the beautiful things is there's not one way, and there's actually not a formula. And for, all of human history, religion has tried to help you. And it's done a lot of other things in the process, some of which are helpful and a lot of which are not. So religion is one way. And for some people that really works. And, that's fine. I do think that the kind of intellectual understanding of consciousness, of reality, of the nature of consciousness, of our relationship to, kind of the universe, I think that stuff can bring about a sense of divine appreciation. So I think there's an intellectual pursuit. The quote from Maimonides, who was a very great scholar and physician and, incredible thinker. He said, the intellect is the glory of God, right? Being able to engage intellectually is divine. I also think that nature, being in nature, and even if you live in a crowded, smoggy city, which I do, finding something in nature, even if it's an ant, watch an ant for 20 minutes, follow a trail. There's such beauty, even in the smallest bits of nature. So those are kind of two easy ones. I'm not a huge fan of being able to tell people the way that they should get in touch with God. I think it depends on your psychology. It depends on your culture, depends, on that whole aspect of framework that you'd like to establish. Do I think meditation's great? Yeah. Has it been the way that I get in touch with God? No, it's the way that I do a lot of other things. But I think it really depends. But we're looking for those moments of like that awe moment, that's, to me, like those are the places to find, your path to that relationship with something divine.
Why do people develop certain things like obsessive compulsive disorder and things of the like?
We know that there's a genetic predisposition for a lot of different things that ail us. But we also know that there's an enormous environmental, situation that can turn genes on and turn, different signals on in our brains and in our bodies and our nervous systems. I think that the pressures of modern society are too much. Like, if I had to give my simplest answer, like what we're doing is like not really working great. And, I appreciate people remembering simpler times. I do appreciate that. As a woman, it's kind of hard often to look back in history and be like, was there a better, simpler time for women? I'm not sure, and what was it like for men as well, in terms of, what we require of each other, right, as humans. I believe in progress. I believe in technology. And I also think that the pace and the cadence, that we are keeping is not compatible really with our nature. We're not supposed to be sitting in chairs, talking on computers, beaming information off satellites, meaning I understand that's what progress looks like, but that's not what our physiology is for. When people would ask me, should I give my kid an iPad? Should I give my baby a phone? Well, how else am I going to keep them busy? And, and I'm kind of like a broken record about this. Like, human primates, we're geared for face-to-face interaction not a lot of gadgets and toys, and interacting with other humans who can meet our needs. We're about storytelling. We're about song. We're about holding and loving and knowing what it feels like to be safe. That's what human primates are. That's what we are. We're a state of animals, like dressed up like what you and I are like now, right? It's like kind of astounding. But that is our natural state, is to be interacting, to be connecting. When you add all this stuff, it's taxing. It's very taxing on the nervous system. And for those of us who also have intergenerational stuff, meaning we come from generations of pain, which many of us do, that stuff can be cumulative in spiritually very interesting ways.
Yeah, my general belief is any form of dis-ease a person experiencing is an adaptive, or you could consider it a maladaptive. Mm-hmm. That would be a judgment. That would be, if you adaptive or maladaptive, would be a judgment for it. Strategy to compensate for what's happening.
That's very accurate. Yep.
If a person's expressing depression or anxiety or multiple personality disorder or bipolar or borderline or OCD or anything that we'd call like a psychopathology, we're reducing it down to a symptom that's now put into a container of like bad. And now we attack the symptom. And another reality you could flip that upside down or inside out or whatever and say, maybe this is actually a perfectly healthy adaptive or maladaptive response to an unhealthy environment the person exists within.
I mean, well said. And I think that's 100% accurate. The place where the system breaks, though, is that we, as Bob Dylan said, it costs more to store the food than it do to give it. We've created a system where care and attention to people's needs is simply, it's reached capacity in a capitalist system like the one that we live in. And I'm not one of these like, boo, capitalism people. But, I grew up, in a large medical health conglomerate, which was what my father as a public school teacher was given for our health care. And we were given 15-minute slots for anything that we needed. And that's not actually the way to care for people, in a way that can be supportive to their overall mental, physical, and spiritual health. So one of the challenges, is that in a system where we do not have the resources and capability to support that disconnect that you're describing, Western medicine steps in and says, yeah, we cannot give you therapy. We cannot send you on a psychedelic journey and hold your hand. We cannot heal your trauma, but we can try. And again, this is not me in defense of psychiatry. We can try and get you to a place where you can function, right? And that's where, in many cases, medication has been seen as the cure-all. Like, look, we fixed you. When my father died, I can't tell you the number of people who said, like, you're going on medication, right? To which I said, no, I'm going to grieve because my body was made to go through the loss of a parent. And I want to and need to experience that in as organic a way as possible, which of course makes everyone, I'm sure say like, there's nothing wrong with medication. It's just helping you get through it. And it's just a bridge. And like, what are you judging me for going on medication? I'm saying for me and my human experience, right? Western medicine helps us not feel our feelings as intensely. And sometimes that's very helpful. And sometimes it's been used as a crutch. And many of us then wonder why we're in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, and we don't know how to deal with things and everything hurts, right? That's how I describe it. Everything hurts. If it's not your body hurting, it's your neighbor next door. It's the boy who didn't like you. It's your girlfriend who has nicer shoes than you. Everything hurts, right? And then it'll come out however your DNA, right, has delivered it for you.
I'd like to take a moment and share a word from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Huel. I'm a fan of Huel. They have saved my butt on many a trip. They are a high-protein, nutritionally complete bag of deliciousness. They contain 27 vitamins and minerals, 40 grams of protein, which is huge. So I can throw this into a shaker bottle or into a cup. It mixes actually absurdly well, which is a cool thing. I'm genuinely very surprised. If you try it out, you will see how well it mixes. It's actually kind of strange and amazing. I like these guys a lot. They're very convenient. They've saved my butt many a times. And literally just a couple weeks ago, literally I was at a hotel, everything was closed. I had a few of these in my bag and it was incredibly helpful. So I think that they are delicious. I like the ingredients inside these things. They feel very nutritionally complete to me, and you guys can get yourself a discount as well. So there's a limited time offer. You can make healthy eating simple. Get Huel today with my exclusive offer of 15% off online with my code Align15. So you go to Huel.com/Align15. Huel is spelled HUEL.com, code Align15. New customers only. Thank you to Huel for partnering and supporting the show.
How do you define trauma?
I leave it to trauma specialists to define trauma, first of all. Gabor Mate talks about little t and big T trauma. The way that I think of it, I guess from a neuroscience perspective, is certain events happen which make it very, very difficult for us to function and then return to baseline. And that's kind of how I would describe trauma, right? Something happens that, gets a significant reaction that then makes it difficult to go back to whatever your baseline was, your homeostasis. The body does keep the score. That's not a myth. That used to be sort of something that, people on the fringes said. And I think we're all, coming around to that. The body does keep the score. And I think that, from a clinical perspective, it is helpful to understand, post-traumatic stress disorder as, a significant disorder that deserves very special attention, but that routinely discussing trauma related to, I had a bad breakup and, by all intents and purposes, let's say it did not have any features of trauma, using those words can, also kind of muddy how we understand what trauma is, right? So I am one of those kind of, uptight people who, when people are like, I'm so OCD, I like my shoes in order. I'm like, that's actually not obsessive compulsive disorder. You can like your shoes in order. So I feel the same way about trauma. I think it's kind of, it's a very sexy word and people have a lot to say about it. Trauma was an aspect of my thesis because I studied obsessive compulsive disorder and I studied oxytocin and vasopressin. And so, this was very early research about intergenerational trauma, which, is a whole other branch than I think a lot of the ways that we talk about trauma now.
Yeah, my feeling is trauma is, so like in Sanskrit, it's a samskara, which means impression. Mm-hmm. And so it's, if you have an orgasm or you find a joke funny, the energy of that experience moves through your body quite easily, usually.
Mm-hmm. Right.
If you have something really terrible happen to mm-hmm. you, which is a judgment, but something that it's too much of an emotional, energetic load for your system to be able to manage in that time, such as you see something gruesome or someone attacks mm-hmm. you or something of the mm-hmm. sort. Yeah. And you don't have the spaciousness in your system in that moment to be able to energetically process that out, then that energy needs to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. And where it goes, since it didn't go out, is in. Yep. That in becomes an impression that you unconsciously hold on to. Carl Jung said, mm-hmm. until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
What we're actually doing is we are actually seeking out the worst possible toxic relationship in order to draw up those impressions that we hold within our system. Mm-hmm. Because if our life doesn't get fucked up enough, we won't do anything to create change. And so the human system desires to heal. At a subconscious level, your system is always finding healing, even if it looks like the perfect toxic relationship to quote unquote ruin your life.
Well, I think, it's very well said. And I think also, the image that I get is sort of this spiral, right? We're kind of like always spiraling up, and sometimes we'll feel like we're repeating, right? Some old habit, some old choice. But I try and remember that that's sort of that healing process is, even if we're coming around to that same thing, we're on a higher level, right? We have more experience, we have more insight, we have more tools. I think that's accurate. And I think also, when you have early trauma, there's an extra special wiring, that we do know goes on. There's a tremendous amount of, complicated studies, often with animals, that kind of have tried to map this out. So, I think you're absolutely right. Also kind of physiologically, we get these sort of like these grooves, right? We fall into a groove, and also anything that vaguely or remotely resembles it, our brain will say like, oh, we know this, we're going to go right into this groove again. That's that sort of repetition compulsion. They're called organizing principles, right? If you have an organizing principle, you will basically be scanning, for evidence of that. And that's just because the brain is like trying to find patterns. It's what it does. It's a meaning maker, it's looking for all that meaning. But yeah, I'm thinking sort of my own journey in terms of the framework that you provided. And yeah, it feels very accurate.
The question that comes to mind is, again, entirely too vague and broad, but I just wonder, like, who are you? Who am I? If we're not our thoughts, or are we our thoughts? If our thoughts are traumatized and it's a distorted pattern because we're holding on to these impressions.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think that's who we are. I think that there's a tiny part of all of us that is pure and pristine, and that was born as a perfect, clean slate, and I think that when people have spiritual experiences, when people have mystical experiences, when people touch these realms through psychedelic journeys, when we have that notion of love and we have that notion of awe just because we exist, to me, like that's sort of that kernel of goodness that is inside all of us. I think that, if I had to kind of pin it down, like the true state of our existence is one of love and peace and connection. Everything else is what happens when, right? And then insert the thing. Trauma happens, war, strife, poverty, lack of distribution of resources, right? All those things that contribute. But, I believe that there is a core of all of us that is kind of that same pure love, like drops in the ocean.
Yeah, I believe a person is the felt state of coherence. When a person feels coherent, that's getting closer to, this is who I am.
Yep.
You'll usually smile. You'll have a smirk.
Yeah.
You're like, you're in a state of awe.
Yeah. Yep.
And when you start to become incoherent or a distortion, so it's like a differentiation between like signal versus noise.
Yeah.
A noisy person is an anxious person, a depressed person, an OCD person, a fill in the blank thing. It's just a distortion.
Sure.
Beneath the distortion, there's always signal. And in the clearing of the noise, the signal that was always there can start to take more center stage.
Totally. Yep.
From your perspective, if you agree with that, which it sounds like you do, if there was one thing a person could start engaging in to create more coherence within their life, if you only had a little toolbox of one or two or three things, what would you suggest for a person to begin creating coherence within themselves?
I mean, not because of the way that we started this podcast, breath, learning how to breathe. Oh. I was literally in my 30s when I first learned what it was to breathe all the way into my lungs and my shoulders. I did not know. I lived for 30 some years thinking I knew how to breathe. And it's like involuntary. Like, what the F do you mean is what I said to this healer who literally was, I think, from another planet. Like, she was on another plane. And I was like, what is this lady talking about? I had never learned how to breathe. And the reason I like this one is it is 100% free. You can do it anytime. And it has the potential to profoundly change your brain chemistry and your physiology. That's just true. That's not like, oh, Mayim's a hippie and like Aaron and she are like on some cuckoo town, like trip about this. This is true. It's been like whatever research you'd like, whatever double blind, blah, 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 it already exists. Learning to breathe, learning to, I don't want to say control your breath, but learning to harness your breath. It is one of the easiest and most significant tools you can have. It's good for panic attacks, which again, everyone thinks they're always having panic attacks. Maybe they are. Breath is the answer. And if you're having not a panic attack, but an anxiety attack, breath is the answer. Breath is the answer for depression. It is the answer for things like OCD, for kind of lowering that baseline, has enormous, enormous impact. So breath would be a big one. Another one would be very, very difficult, to say this, especially as someone who struggles and has struggled with depression. You have to move your body. Another thing that is completely free, like my first two tools, you have to move your body. And it literally, and I'm 50 years old, like use it or lose it. And that refers to mobility, to your joints. My partner, my podcast partner and life partner, he's always like stretching and rotating and new gadgets to like stretch his toes out. And I thought he was crazy. So apparently it's a thing. You have to move your body. It moves things through. It shifts your metabolism. It helps you with homeostasis. And one of the best measurements for what your life will be like in terms of your happiness is how much you're able to use your body, right? Uh-huh. Our grandparents looked old and near death at like 50 and 60. It's not like that anymore, and it doesn't have to be. We know more. You have to move your body, and you have to find what works for you. When I hear people who are like, I wake up at 4 a.m. and I do 45 minutes of this program online. Fantastic. If that's not what you want to do, you're not going to do it, and you're just going to feel bad about yourself and get more depressed. You have to find what works for your body. Those are kind of like my big two. And I guess my third would be like, I'm going to say this not eloquently, like work on your shit. Like the time is now, if you think more than 3 people a day are an asshole, you're the asshole. My friend Allison told me that when I was 19 years old. Like if you're constantly having challenges with people, it doesn't mean you're bad or wrong. It means you've got some shit to work out, and it's probably not your fault. Like work on your shit. Like I'm a big fan of people having a solid, good relationship with someone who does talk therapy. And I'm also a fan of CBT. I'm actually working on dialectical behavioral therapy for myself right now. I love somatic therapy. I like all the things, but you know what? At some point you got to open your mouth and be like, here's what was hard. Here's how I framed the world because of the way my life was. I need someone with more skills than me to help me figure out ways to make it better. And I can tell you the 10 books I think you should read that can help you work your shit out. But if you can find a good person that you feel comfortable and honest with, work your shit out. Do it for 6 sessions. Everyone around you will probably be happy about it.
So that's exactly what I teach. And I have a whole online community around breathing and nervous system regulation and embodiment. And I've spent
I did good. I did some research, but I did pretty good.
I would have the exact same one. I don't know if you did that because of maybe there's some
100% did not.
attunement thing 100%. Happening. Yeah, your breath is the longest lever to regulate your system. It's a 1-to-1 relationship for your autonomic state, i.e. just how the fuck you feel all the time. It's the exact fingerprint of your state, your breath. And your movement, your postural patterns and your expressions is the same thing. And we've outsourced our movement, which is actually like a healing tuning mechanism for every system and every cell in our entire body to technology and, machines. And now we're inside of our house. The reason people are sick is because we're excessively domesticated. You need to embrace sunlight. Correct. Is the other one that I think you probably believe based off of listening to you. If you're afraid of the sun, you're afraid of yourself, essentially. If you're afraid of nature, you're afraid of yourself.
Yeah. Look, many of us have good reason to be afraid of the sun, and I appreciate that. But yeah, I literally played hooky from my life, and I happen to be fortunate enough to live near the coast. And I drove and I sat at the beach and I listened to the waves and I watched the water and I picked up shells and rocks and I felt my feet in the sand and I got just some like sunlight and that was it. Like that was honestly like, that was better than therapy. And it was better than like dealing with the accounting that I have to do like on my, my mom's apartment, blah, blah. Like, it was better therapy. I was a human, a human being for that hour.
You get moved by nature, and when I'm saying, be afraid of sun, I just mean like you need to go outside. If you're not outside, it's an issue.
Correct.
And the last one that I would say, which is exactly what you said, is I think trauma, repressed emotions that you're holding within your system, that life hasn't become hard enough yet for you to begin to be it becomes a necessity to look at that. I think the Carl Jung quote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll direct your life and call it fate, is like one of the most valuable quotes to kind of just ponder on.
Oh yeah. The expression I've heard, which is I think from a 12-step room, is let go or be dragged. And that's correct. Like literally, like whatever it is, let go, or just you're holding on and you'll be dragged behind that truck.
Yeah. And so the one of the worst things that can happen to a person is a kind of middle of the road, alrighty life. Because if you're kind of like middle, like zone beta, like everything's just kind of alrighty, you might never really get to break the shackles that are actually deeply holding you within. In some ways, that's why the Bible says a rich person is less likely to get in the gates of heaven than the camel through the eye of a needle, because a rich person has so much of their world. This is why fame is tricky. So they have so much of the world solidifying their persona it might be shackles, it might not be. Whereas if a person smokes crack, or they're like our mutual friend Betty, who was a prostitute and I think like a meth head or whatever you call a homeless prostitute is how she labels herself. In some ways, it's kind of like spiritual steroids, because you're like, well, this isn't working.
Yep. Well, you're given from Betty's perspective, from people who have kind of seen the other side and literally come back. Yeah, these are the lessons that you're here to learn on Earth School. And there are days when I'm like, I don't like these lessons. I don't like the simulation today. Like whoever's in charge of this, not what I would have chosen, right? But yeah, like that is what it means to sort of also like live with mindfulness, right? To live in acceptance, to live with purpose. It doesn't mean everything's perfect and good all the time. And I'm sure you would not say that your life is perfect and good all the time either. But it gives you the tools and the resources, all of this work, to deal with things when they're not easy, beautiful, and perfect.
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate you very much. Thank you for making time to have this conversation.
This was amazing.
Is there anything? Oh, good. I appreciate that.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed that episode, you might also enjoy this episode over here, as well as this one over here. Thanks for subscribing. Appreciate you. I'll see you in the next video.